Call the July 11th, 2014 CalSTRS Board meeting to order. You could take the roll, please.
City State Treasurer, Mr. Boykin. Here. City Director of Finance, Ms. Ortega. Here. Ms. Vega. Here. Ms. Dillon.
Here.
Ms. Hendricks.
Here.
Mr. Rosensteel.
Here.
The Superintendent of Public Instruction, Ms. Zumat.
Here.
Mr. Unterman.
Here.
And for the State Controller, Mr. McGuire.
Here.
Chairperson Keeley, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, so item number 1 on the agenda, getting right to work, is the approval of the board agenda. Entertain a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Dana, seconded by Joy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. The board agenda has been approved. Item number 2, do I see Marianne? Is Marianne? Okay. Credible compensation regulations, Marianne Ashley. Good morning, Marianne.
Good morning. Originally, the board item was going to be to adopt the final regulations. However, we did have an opportunity to talk with Department of Finance, and so staff has suggested some revisions to the regulations based on the conversations that we had with Finance. I think you've been given the new proposed regulations, which delete item number E under 27,400 salary in regards to fringe benefits, and it also removes a provision under item or issue 27,602 compensation that is paid a limited number of times. We have shared the proposed changes with our stakeholders, and we've not received any comments or concerns, and we've also vetted it through internally with our program areas, and they're all on board with the changes. So what the board would need to do is to approve these changes, and then we would move forward with another 15-day comment period. Does anybody have any questions?
Dana?
Marion, could you repeat what sections?
The first section is 27,400 under salary, and it's subsection E regarding fringe benefit. We would remove that provision.
A different color here than what we have before us. All right, and how long ago were these changes made?
It just recently, Department of Finance was quite busy dealing with the budget and other issues, so we hadn't had an opportunity to speak with them until just recently.
So when did the changes go to the stakeholder groups?
Probably about 2 weeks ago.
Thank you.
Sharon?
So Marianne, so there'll be another 15-day period, and so there'll be opportunities for stakeholder groups or input at that point, or?
Right. We'd start the 15-day comment period hopefully within the week, and then if there weren't any changes that warranted more revisions, then we could bring back this version to the board in September for final approval, and then move forward to the OAL and still meet the targeted implementation effective date of January 1st.
I was just aware of some concerns about the deletion of the part-time provision and some tweaking on just making sure there's parity on earnings for creditable compensation. So I don't know if those concerns were voiced in the appropriate time. So if there are those concerns, and I know there's been dialogue with staff about that, the 15 days allows those parties to give that input and make modifications, and then does that come back to us?
Right.
And
So
then
after the 15 days, if the comments didn't warrant changes, we'd come back with this language. Otherwise, if they were real substantive and we had to make a lot of revisions, we'd have to probably start the package all over because of the time frame. Our 1 year is up in December.
I'm sorry, and then that 15 days, when does that starts?
We would try to start it immediately within the week.
Dana?
So by striking the parity compensation and lottery, if monies are given to members On a one-time basis through lottery funds, those will no longer now be considered credible compensation?
No, not necessarily. It depends on how the contract's written. So if they're only for a limited period of time, like a one-time payment, if it's only for the 2015-16 year, or it's limited to 3 times, then it would not be creditable. But if there's no limit written in the contract, they're just ongoing, then they could still be considered DB creditable.
How would that look for a one-time payment made from lottery funds, to leave that open-ended? I mean, is that something then the districts would negotiate with their unions to say every year a certain percentage of the lottery funds come to the employees?
They wouldn't put a limited time frame on it. So there wouldn't be an end point to the payments. So they may be paid just once a year, but if they. Right. They couldn't have it in the contract that it would end. There'd be a certain end date.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? This is an action item, so I'd entertain a motion to approve the staff recommendation, to adopt these changes and to open up a 15-day hearing period. Moved by Arena, seconded by Grant. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you very much, Mary. Thanks. Okay.
This has been a complicated regulation. I want to sure we still have the
No.
hope that, you know, there are other regulations to do in the future, but this is one of the tougher topics, and it had been the centerpiece of much of the discussion and reform too. So it's not surprising. We keep having a piece, and then there's another suggestion and a change and everything. But I assure you, other regulations that we'll be doing will be much more straightforward than this one. This just happens to be one of the toughest you tackled, and we will get to the finish line.
Item number 3 on our agenda is the approval of the employee reimbursement for board member services. Brian Bartow, our general counsel. Brian, good morning.
Good morning. This is an item that comes before you annually, according to your board policy and according to Education Code Section 22224. And it recognizes that educators who are members of the benefit system take significant amount of time away from their regular duties, and this is the reimbursement of employers. This is you last visited this, I believe it was year before last, to calculate the figures based upon actual time spent, and so this is before you for approval. The only thing I'd like to add is we take a look at, or the board has taken a look at this, using this measure every couple of years, sort of, you know, doing sharpening a pencil, seeing the actual time spent by affected board members, and that's what's reflected in the policy. And so I know that the board is currently looking at being more efficient and perhaps meeting less. Although, as I mentioned to Mr. Keeley, I think that really is just going from classroom study to self-study. I don't know if that would result in any less burden on the, or less amount of work on the affected board members. But I would suggest that we, for 15-16, after you've made some of the changes, that we take a look at that again, sort of keep some records of the amount of time that the affected board members are spending, and then see if these are still an accurate percentage. So the item here today is to approve the compensation or the reimbursement level based upon your current policy.
Thank you, Brian. This is an action item. Are there questions or comments? Seeing none, and entertain a motion to approve. Moved by Michelle.
Second.
Seconded by Paul. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passed. Thank you. Item 4 is Thank you, Brian. Item 4 on our agenda is a breakdown of the work plans for each committee for the year. So I'm just going to suggest, as the chairs of each committee and the staff persons for each committee, as you're presenting your work plans, you have an option and choice of either presenting the work plan and walking us through stuff that we've already discussed, highlighting aspects of the plan that you think we just want to reinforce here, ask if there are any amendments or changes, or just present it as is and have it approved, move for approval without any discussion if you don't think it's necessary. So it's not necessary for everyone to walk through every aspect of the work plan. Okay? All right, so the first is the board's work plan for 2014 and 15. And clearly, the work plan is going to look a little different than it has over the last 10 years. There's a
Some things
little,
omitted.
one major item that will be omitted and won't be part of the work plan, and we can feel the relief and joy in the room, and a lot of people should get a lot of credit for that. So not dealing with the funding strategy in 13 and for 14, 15, that is off our plate. So I would like to highlight on the work plan, let me see where it is here. There's going to be some focus on some policy readings. And if you look at regulations and policies, in November and February, the benefits policy first reading, benefit policy second reading, and action in February. Whether or not the committee wants to have the full board look at these benefit policy issues, or do we think they should go to the Benefits and Services Committee and then have them make a recommendation to us? Is there a sense on the board what your preference would be? And Jack, do you want to add anything about
The one you had called out earlier, remember when we did the earnings and annuity credit decision before, you actually explicitly said, we want to look at that policy again. So that's why it's named in there. And actually, when I looked in detail, you were really relying on a prior board discussion rather than a formal articulated policy. And that really led us to the other realization that you take various votes in benefits around rate decisions and things that don't have policies backing them explicitly. So we want to do it's a great time now to clean up some stuff, so we want to go through the benefits area and get that all right around any time you take an action as a board. I want to make sure there's a thoughtful policy around that. So we're going to go back and just kind of watch all the decisions you make and then see what policies are in a gap. But what I defer to Harry and the rest of you is, do you want the Benefits and Services Committee to percolate that discussion and do that and then pass that up to the board for a vote, or did you want it like this in a 1, 2, 3 sequence with the board? Your call how you like to structure that, but it's a good time to get this done this year for us. It won't be complicated, but just we want to get a good governance around all the benefit decisions you make.
Sharon?
Well, I was just going to suggest that Benefits and Services do the first run and then present it to the board. I like the idea of our committees having, that work, and then obviously would we see it in the next board meeting? Is that how that would work? That would come to Benefits and Services to kind of craft a stronger
Agenda a little
policy.
farther down, we should then, if that's your preference, then I would look at this agenda a little farther down today and annotate that with these items. It's the first two Harry's referring to, the benefits policies and the earnings and annuity credits. The valuation policy speaks to the funding bill, really, and I think our recognition that it references different valuation periods that we now have to calculate. There'll be a little more complicated actuarial valuations that we're presenting to you. So again, I think Ed and I felt, it's good to have a policy around these so we know exactly what these valuations are doing. I assume that one you probably want to do at the board level. You've done all the valuation stuff at the past. And we left the regulation one because you are the adjudicatory body for regulations. That's why we left the regulation with the whole board, right? So that's kind of how to think that tiering of those 4 things you see there. And again, it's up to you how you want to handle those first 2, of course.
Dana?
I think it's appropriate to vet it through benefits and services. They've resided there. Although, anyone on the board can attend those meetings, and some of us have. I think those of us that have sat on benefits and services are a lot more familiar with it and then can push that forward. Makes sense to me.
Okay. Is there anyone opposed to that recommendation? Okay, so we'll make we'll just ask that we make the adjustment when we get to the benefits and services work plan. We'll make that adjustment. Any other comments on that aspect of the work plan?
I was going to
Right, Jack.
something, Dana, you're chairing benefit services now with Joy. The other thing I'm just thinking about, when we do regulations, it's under the Administrative Procedures Act, and as you endured this, there's extraordinarily structured periods for comment, and that's the way public regulations work. Policy development obviously has a more informal quality about it, I guess I'd say. But when you do these, particularly around the benefits area and really other policies you do, I guess it doesn't have to be this committee, you might want to think a bit, how do we get the right stakeholder input? Is it just as simple as asking me, or Ed, did you talk to people? Or should there be a better way of doing that so that you do feel these things have that level of vetting? And when does the vetting occur? So, I guess I think that's something we have to think about better, maybe as an organization. Now that we have time to think harder about some other things, especially around those policies. The annuity credit is a perfect example, one where absolutely it's money in the pocket of your members. How are we gonna get feedback into that process? So, I asked all of you, the chair committees, we might want to think more about that stakeholder input part of our policy development.
Okay. Yeah.
There were a couple other small things.
Jack, before we go on, Paul has a
Yeah,
question.
I'm sorry, but I guess I'm a little confused about which task we're talking about here on the,
Policy.
because you were mentioning valuation. Are we talking about the adoption of the valuations that come from our actuaries in April?
No.
Yeah, we're talking about the process that we do the actuarial evaluations and how they speak to different measurement periods in the funding bill, just policies that we know when we do them and what they speak to, yeah. What ones we're doing.
Yeah.
This isn't the
Let's-
adoption
yeah,
of
we
policy,
need to
it's
back
not the adoption of the evaluation, it's the policy around doing them.
Which is, what do you mean, the policies are?
We don't have a specific policy around conducting those valuations. We thought, given the reference to different valuation periods in the funding bill, it might make sense to spell that out, when we do them in what years, and what they speak to the valuations.
Developing policies to direct our actuaries in how they develop
To support
the materials that they have typically then brought to us for the board's adoption in April.
Yeah, what time periods they speak to, exactly.
And the reason that we need to do this is because of the funding bill?
It complicated the reference to different valuation periods, we thought. I don't have,
Past where has the direction come from, or the policy come from to direct?
simpler approach, but from the, in terms of the frequency, from your decision on frequency, informal that it might be, and then the time period from the statute being an annual evaluation period. But this now references other periods that might affect employer rates, and we thought you might want to spell that out just to make sure that there's no lack of clarity in how you direct the actuary to prepare those valuations for you. Just
And so the idea is to start that conversation at benefits and services?
No.
No.
I was suggesting because you as a, no, sorry.
Just the benefits policy and the additional earnings and annuity credits, those two. The actuarial valuation and the regulation for direct employer reporting would remain with the board.
And Paul, the other item, just, if I,
So,
See, I don't see this.
These two would go to benefits and services, these two would stay with the board.
Okay.
This would be the information, then the action. So it would only be these two. And these two would stay with the board. So the actual evaluation and the regulations would stay
Got
with
it.
the board.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank
I
you.
think it is.
Just to close that, as part of the other item that's on here around the funding is we wanted to come back in September just to go through in some detail the parts of the funding bill that need to be implemented in different ways. One is collecting rates. We've got some administrative issues. This issue we were talking about here also is part of that, is the valuations that would come in the future. So it'll be part of that package overview. So we'll go through this in September in detail, the funding bill and what we're doing, what years, and that will speak to having this policy. So we'll make that very clear what the content parameters would be of a policy around valuations then. And then you can give us feedback. Is that what you want us to do for implementing the bill? Just want to make sure everything's covered.
I was just not sure where on this matrix we were looking, I'm sorry.
And I had some small things too, whenever you have a chance, Harry, that on the.
What's that, Jack?
I have a few small things to suggest, if I could, just dating issues. And talking with, by the way, Ed's not here. He's on vacation. Well, we're not really sure where he is, actually. You know, he left and he was talking about going to some meditation center in China, and we do not know where he is. But if he's listening right now, because I got an email from him an hour ago, he better get back on vacation. But having said that, he's overseeing with Tom Barrett the election next year for board, and so one change we suggested they felt we just getting on the road faster is doing the notice of the board election in September of this year, so we can do that, just to get that formal process going. As a side thing for those of you, we're also doing an RFP right now for the administrator of the election. It's time to refresh that contract, so not something you have to worry about, but we're doing a bid right now for that. It's time to do that. And then we could notice the election as early as September for the 2015 election. And then just on the off-site items, you know, I put those on there because we have them on there each year. But then Nancy and Amy reminded me that at last year's offsite, you actually had made a decision to handle that a little bit differently this year. That my understanding is you'd like to alternate every other year on the self-evaluation and then on the consultant evaluations, rather than doing all 9 or, well, now you'd be up to 10, rather than doing all 10 consultants at once, do half and then all half. So I'll get guidance from Sharon and Harry about which of the, that's good. It's a new word. I'm going to use that now, I think. I say that too much. We'll get guidance from you on which half of those 10 you'd like to do this year. So I would suggest then we take off the self-evaluation. We'll do that in the succeeding year. And then the last thing we'd like to change is I think we'll be in better shape presenting the new investment impact study to you in November rather than September. So those were the only ones I had, but I do want to again invite you. We've got a terrific research staff here that has spent a lot of time working on the funding strategy and different parts of it. So that does mean we've got some capacity. So I just want to lodge that in your thinking. If there's things just like you do in investments where you set topical issues of things to think about and get big picture about, you know, we have some opportunity, I think, in staff capacity around the whole organization to do some research. So we're on track to do this economic study for you with some outside academic individuals, but we can also do more. So come back if you want to, some thoughts about that, or if there's things that are percolating.
Sharon?
Yeah, I know Harry and I have talked a little bit about this, and because we have such an amazing staff, I know, and I think we've talked a little bit about the idea of looking at the topic of retirement security in the U.S. in general, and kind of I know that there's a lot of other organizations like NERS that are doing great work in this area, but since that seems like an issue, obviously, for our stakeholders, it would be interesting to me to have us look at something around kind of where are we at in terms of the data for retirement security in America, retirement security for teachers, the comparison almost between, you know, states that have a defined benefit plan and those that don't, or so maybe that's something we can flesh out a little bit more, but that's certainly something I think would be interesting for us to pursue and get a little deeper on in terms of research.
Just some other thoughts on that issue. Just piggybacking on what Jack was saying, that there's some, and speaking with Jack and Sharon, that there's some capacity that we have now and some time that's been freed up because the funding strategy issue that's consumed so much energy and time is going to create maybe some vacuum there for an opportunity for the staff to work with some outside groups on issues around retirement. And, is there an opportunity for us to address or present some data around the retirement crisis that actually exists in America? Because there clearly is one.
If you don't, if you read the
Well,
paper.
if you go into a Pavilions or a Vons or a grocery store and you notice that people are in their 70s boxing groceries now. That didn't occur 10 or 15 years ago, and those people are there, and I think probably not because they have to be, want to be there, but because they have to be there. Although it's a little bit of a one-off for us, because it would be going maybe beyond just looking at teachers in California and our DB, DBS, and our hybrid plan. We have an opportunity and we have a voice that will be listened to, and perhaps we can add some value to a conversation that is, from my perspective, is not really happening widely enough and often enough around the whole issue of this crisis about retirement security and dealing with retirement in our country. So the three of us, Jack, Sharon, and I, thought, maybe this would be a good year that we added one other research project onto the work plan for the board. So we'd like to get your feedback, a thumbs up, thumbs down, good idea, not a good idea. So we're open to comments or suggestions or support. Lorena?
Yeah, this comment is not to take away any of the seriousness of the issue that you raise or the concerns that we should all have about retirement security, but I also want to be really mindful of the major project that the staff is going to be working on in the coming years, and that's the business renew and the technology project. So I think that when we look at projects that are successful and not successful, sometimes the amount of time and effort that's able to be put into it is really makes a huge difference. So I just also want to not think that because we have the funding solution in place that we don't have another major challenge, and so I don't want to just replace the
Right.
staff that onto a new project without thinking about the one that we've already committed to. So
Good one.
Excellent point, and one that we thought about, but thank you for voicing that. Other comments or feedback? Is there any opposition to placing this item, another research item on the work plan, being mindful that it's not something that becomes overly burdensome or consumes too much time and energy or focus of the staff and takes away from really the major project that's in front of us and from our perspective, really the oversight of the risks associated with the business renew and that project. So, Grant.
Thank you. This is in opposition, and I very much appreciate the idea of looking at retirement security beyond CalSTRS members. But I also think, and I think maybe Ed has done some research for us in the past, it'd be interesting to look at, say, recent retirees who do have our DB benefit and our supplemental benefits as well, and look at what are they doing after retirement? Do they feel confident and comfortable in retirement? And, drilling down and get a better look at our members, in that place in the 5-10 years after retirement. But I don't want to, again, I would echo the comments about not overburdening staff.
So I think that's an excellent point because it keeps us back on our focus of who we're serving. But if there's a way to also incorporate that into the study to see whether or not, our retired teachers after a career in education are actually better positioned than the average Californian that's retiring. So I clearly hear that there's we're sensitive to, we don't want to lose focus too much, take our energy away from the major projects that's ahead of us. And that we don't want to overburden staff with a project that would remove the focus from our top priority now that the funding, we have this funding solution in place. So, but I don't hear anyone really voicing, don't do anything. So, is that accurate? Oh, yeah, Paul?
No, I think it's a great idea, but I kind of embellishing upon what Grant said, I do think bringing it back to our members
Right.
and those who rely on, the DB program and those who rely on others of our programs and sort of, what does it mean for somebody who has been a teacher but had a lot of part-time jobs and never really got into the, right, and the lack of social security. So I think the bringing it back to our members, because I think that we have to keep in mind what our fiduciary obligation here is. But in the context of a larger study, I think is important. I think it's enormously important for us to understand that.
Maybe I'm just gonna comment
Go ahead.
on that, just
Sure.
maybe the key is contextualization, so that we focus on our members and look at that, but in the context of the greater issue around retirement security in America. So, I mean, we bring it back to our members, but I do think it's helpful to kind of, sort of compare and contrast, because I do think it's a crisis, and it is something that's not really the bell is not really, being sounded, I think. And so I think if we contextualize it back to our members, but look at the bigger backdrop, that'd be helpful.
Okay, so hearing that, we already have so much data on our own membership, and we know what the replacement ratio is, and we know that teachers who also have a 403B product or 401K, and hopefully they're in pension too, are in much better shape when they're ready to retire than teachers who have just, educators who have just relied on the DB side, right? So in terms of bringing something back to the committee, is the committee comfortable with Sharon and I working with Jack to really frame what the topic will be, taking into consideration the comments that have been made by the committee members that have spoken? And then we could bring back, probably in September, Jack, what the scope of what the research project would be. People comfortable with that? Sure. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So anything else, Jack, that you wanted to add for the work plan? All right. Okay, so that was 4A. That's action. So we'll move approval of the board's work plan for 2014-15.
Move approval?
Moved by Dana,
Second.
seconded by Joy. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, that passes.
So
4,
can I just ask, so we'll get a copy of the revised plan with the items under regulation and policies that are going to benefits and services for the next meeting? Is that?
Every meeting.
Right, okay, got
And
it,
they'll be
okay.
on, and they'll be on the internet as well.
Both.
The internet? Okay.
4B, Michelle. The appeals.
So I have a deceptively easy work plan. So it's just, we
were just
discussed that
never
this
about
morning. The appeals committee meets as needed to hear, deliberate, and decide on the appeals of CalSTRS determinations and the administrative reviews. And I think the work plan's pretty straightforward, as is required by our charter and needed. So I would entertain any suggestions or amendments, but otherwise we'll leave it at that.
I move approval.
It's been moved by Sharon for approval of the work plan. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Grant. All those in favor?
Aye.
4C is the Audits and Risk Management Committee work plan. Paul?
So,
You want to buzz in, Paul?
oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I would say there's nothing really that remarkable about it. Pretty much doing the same things that we've done in the past. I would just note a couple of things. First of all, that our there we go. Okay, so I would just note a couple of things. First of all, that our We are using a lot of our staff, our audit staff, to assist Crow with the work that they have to do because of the new GASB rules. So that is going to affect the staffing that we have available to do other external audits. So we're going to be living with that this year. The only other thing I would say that's sort of different from last year is what we're going to be focusing on in terms of presentations and continuing education. Last year we spent a lot of time understanding GASB, the new GASB rules. This year the topics that we are thinking about are cybersecurity, financial reporting pertaining to global financial reporting, and then regulatory compliance requirements. So we'll be having educational presentations about those topics. Otherwise, I think it's pretty straightforward and offered up for your approval.
Okay. Any questions? Jack?
Just, this is the perfect part of the agenda, actually, to introduce our new audit director, since he's here with us. I thought, if you don't mind, Paul, I'll do that. We're very excited to have Larry Jensen join us. Larry, do you mind just standing up for a minute?
Welcome.
Yeah.
CalSTRS.
And he's been on the job about a week and digging in.
And he's still here.
Yeah. But if you remember from our brief summary of his resume to you, I mean, he's bringing decades of experience from CalPERS to us, both as the Director of Audit Services and as the Chief Risk Officer. So it's really a twofer for the organization. We wanted, again, a strong leader in the audits program, but we also want to develop, with Robin's leadership, our risk management functions here. And so Larry's going to be a great source of intellectual stimulation for that program as well. And again, I can't say enough for Marianne's contributions to us in stabilizing and strengthening this program. So I feel very good that Larry is following in good footsteps and will take you where you want to be as a board. So I think that's very exciting. On the GASB side, I will say it's rare that you can say that your liability has changed from 167 billion to 74 billion. Shows you the issues around GASB, I guess, by saying that with the stroke of a pen and a bill, that suddenly your GASB liability is reduced by $100 billion. But that was part of the final discussions, and although it might there's some other adjustments we need to make to get the final net pension liability, it is a very different picture for the organization, since we were absolutely the national outlier on the NPL for the country. But to Paul's point, this is new for us, having the auditors in the field sampling 100 school districts, physically going to 100 school districts, not just the costs that you mentioned, but just it's a very intense activity with schools we've never done before. It probably has some good educational value. It brings right to their front door that they're going to be booking these liabilities, so that's probably good. But we all, I think, want to, at the end of this audit period, sit down and talk about what we learned from this and how much value came from all of that external activity, since it is intense. And as I mentioned before to Paul, I want to visit with the other pension systems around the country to see, are they doing that much field testing of their employers or not? I'm sensing we're being more aggressive around this, but we want to see what value comes from that at the end of the day.
Yeah, and we had a conversation at Audit and Risk Management and with Crow about that and how much they were going to be doing, because they feel that they need to do this much. It's the first time, and we'll see, and we encourage them to see whether in the process they could extract some other value that could be useful to us in auditing and seeing how districts are functioning, so that it's kind of a twofer. Yeah, so the
only thing that I would add is that we're starting to get. Just in the last week, we're starting to get pinged by other systems about what we're doing to implement this. So, part of what we need to watch over the course of the next year is whether we've just been out front and there is consistency versus whether we have done something different. But it's interesting, I got two questions from systems in the States this last week about the whole schedule of proportionate share and the presentation of NPL by a cost-sharing plan and what that means to financial reporting. And this is really just, so it feels like it's just starting to sink in. And I feel very proud of the work our staff has done, so I want to put that plug here, to be in a position where I could just answer the questions. This is what we're doing, and provide that resource to our partners across the United States. So I just want to make sure that you understand how our staff has worked hard to be well positioned to assimilate these challenges, and that we're going to be able to support others in not that that's our goal, but just in sharing that perspective with them. So just wanted you to hear that call out.
Thanks, Robin. Any other comments or questions from staff or the board?
I'm just chiming in because
Dana?
I'm next up. It's not a question.
Oh, okay, okay. So Paul moved for adoption the work plan for the audits committee for 2014-15. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Raina. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Dana?
So-
Benefits and services?
So next up is benefits and services, and if you'll go to TRB 39, just really quickly, you can see that, Jack, how long has it been since we last did a member demographic study? It's been a while, hasn't it?
Marion, this is the one we talked about with the study between the demographics on the community college.
What was the question?
On the demographic study they have on the work plan, this is what you're doing, I assume.
I can barely remember.
Look them up and get.
All right, they have pretty good stuff.
And this is different than the ones that we do for our assumptions.
Right, they're looking at the community college faculty.
And the member demographic?
Yes.
That's the one I brought up. That's what I thought, it just got named differently. I suggested that we always look at this data in one big heap. Do you remember this? We had a discussion, and I said, right?
I think you and Ed have this.
Yeah.
Yes.
When I was saying it, this was like one of those moments in the board meeting, though, I realized we always present you the average salary, the average this, the average that, because the membership is so dominated by our K through 12 membership. But I said, I bet you there are some interesting differences. It isn't just about part-time, but it's generally pulling out the entire community college part of the membership and trying to present, and I, frankly, that might change some of our speaking points in the future, so we have a little more richer presentation of the system. Because frankly, probably the community college people feel kind of always in the caboose in some of those statistics, I would have to think. So that,
But we're going to do it on all our members, not just part-time community college.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's been a long time since we've done anything like this.
yeah, I'm not sure, at least since I've been here, I don't recall we've ever richly split the membership and really provided a profile of that. Is this,
A comparison between K-12 and community college faculty.
All right. Well, I would invite all the board members to come because it's going to be an interesting report. We're also going to be looking at our member service objectives in September and the adoption of the contribution rate adjustments that are going to be taking effect because of AB 1469 Bonta and the solution to the unfunded liability. Moving into April, we will have an update on our part-time faculty issues, and it sounds like maybe our demographic study will create some issues for that work group, and that work group is ongoing. Also, status of the Medicare Premium Payment Program population. It has been several years since we've taken a look at that population. We have put off doing anything with that group because of the unfunded liability. So I think it's time to take a look at what the status of that group is in case we want to do something in the future. We will be transitioning the pension to record keeping from TI-CREF to Voya Financial, and we will be talking about that also in April. Then in June, we'll have our annual member satisfaction survey results and input on the committee work plan. Now, we have a couple things we wanted to add to our work plan. So that would be the benefits policies and the earnings and annuity credit policies. Were we thinking maybe, Peggy, of having additional meetings or trying to put that into the meetings that we already have scheduled?
Well, and that was the question that I was gonna ask.
I'm thinking we were gonna have to
I'm
have
thinking we
additional
probably
meetings.
would need to add a November meeting to this schedule so that, and I'm not sure that for the September meeting that we can have the draft policies available for first reading. So it may be that we just expand the time frame for those a little bit. But I can work with Ed when he comes back from vacation because his staff are gonna be taking the lead in drafting those policies.
All right, I would think that the board needs to be prepared that we would have a couple additional meetings then throughout the year. And Peggy and I've had a conversation earlier this morning. And Ed and I have had a conversation too, and you'll see when we talk about the solution to the unfunded liability, that we will have contributions coming into the DBS. Those contributions then would be refunded to the employer. The employer then refunds that to the member. And having some conversations with some members, there's some hesitancy with that process. And so one of the things Ed and I have talked about is what would our obligation be to the member to assure them that this is the money the district's going to be receiving, and this is what you should expect. And so we will be taking a look at what our role would be and responsibility to the members in making sure that they know what type of refund they would be getting. So I'd like to add that. And then Peggy and I also spoke this morning. We have districts and members that are taking advantage of incentive programs that are for early retirement that are run through us. And there's a very strict stipulation that they not come back and work in that district for 5 years. Well, right now, there's a lot of people that are out there to substitute. But in some districts, they're not, particularly in the rural areas. And sometimes our members forget that they can't come back to work. And when they have an employer call them and ask them to substitute, they feel an obligation to their community, to their school. They return to work, they sub one day, and they've lost their incentive. And so I'd like to explore if there's any way that we could help facilitate notification either to the districts or to the members to remind them, this is the deal that you made when you retired under this incentive program. Please do not return to work because it's been devastating for some of our members when they've lost that additional benefit. So we'll be taking a look at that also. And, sure.
I don't know what time frame you were expecting for us to plug that into, but it would probably be at one of the additional meetings. I don't think that we'll be prepared for the September meeting to include that
I don't
announcement.
think either one of those are really crucial. Well, the DBS and how we notify members would probably be, if we could try to do that sooner than later, but the other issue is something that we can take our time on. And then I would appreciate any input from the board.
Joy?
So, yeah, I have a question about the DBS and the districts having to refund to the members. Is there specific timing for when those reimbursements back to the members have to happen? Is it on a, what's the lag between when the contribution comes in here versus when it has to go back there? Is it an annual true-up? Because that would probably drive then what Dana's talking about.
And Robin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in the conversation that the conversation that I've had with Ed is that we don't really have clarity until after the year end on the DB and DBS, so any of those refunds would have to come after that time period.
I want to note one thing before we talk about that in particular, is that anytime a contribution is changed by the employer, if it results in the return of contributions, it's been our practice to return on a prompt basis the member and the employer contributions, and it's the employer's responsibility. So that is happening literally on a monthly basis. But I think we're talking here about the more global aspect as it relates to the implementation of the funding bill.
Yeah. And there's really two pieces to it. There's a piece that we can do on an iterative basis every month, and then there's the part that will require the end-of-year settlement where we ascertain whether somebody has in fact provided more than a year of service. And in both cases, we will do that as a part of the ongoing processing of the contribution inflow. So on the monthly basis, we would be returning amounts if we in fact can do that. As a result of the current annual update process, we will also be returning contributions. And I'm sorry, I was distracted a bit because I was talking about your concern. And we will have the information in the member account, so I think some of this is a matter of communication tools. And so I want to assure you that there are ways that we can address it. It's just a matter of how we communicate it so that everybody that needs to be informed can be informed.
And I think it's just something that we didn't think about because we didn't expect it to come down this way.
Yeah. Well, and
We're gonna do it.
you're getting a picture of the discussions we're having on a daily basis with the implementation of this. And, so again, we've been talking about the money due changes on August 7th. And, again, we're going, as Jack mentioned, some of the administrative challenges. You're being exposed in this conversation to the conversations that are happening in the towers around this as we speak. So, and I'm sorry, I was a bit distracted, but that's exactly what I was doing.
Kind of give us context for if we're able to come up with a solution around outreach to the members, what sense of timing we might have. Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you,
The good
Peggy.
news, just that sounds complicated and unfortunate, but the good news is that we were pleased is, again, that there is no tax consequences to the member. That would have been meltdown. When they have constructive receipt of the return of those contributions is when they would be affecting their taxes. So that's the good part for sure. And again, administrative problems, we'll have to spend resources doing this. Small issue in comparison to the success. So, we will absolutely get through it. Again, Robin is the executive here at CalSTRS in charge of the project, if we want to call it that, to make sure the bill gets implemented correctly.
Thanks, Jack.
That's it for me.
Okay. Any
That's it.
comments or questions from staff and committee? Okay. Dana's moved adoption of the work plan for benefits and services. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Sharon. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Passes. Terry, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Board Governance Committee really has one major activity or task before it for this next year, and it will be working with the board's governance consultant, the board's general counsel office, and the fiduciary council to basically go back to square one in some respects and review the charter and the scope of the Board Governance Committee's authority to determine whether the charter should be expanded to permit review and recommendations regarding the organization and content of the entire board policy manual. There'll be some focus on possibly adopting a self-assessment policy that currently does not exist. They'll be looking at some aspects of the compensation policy to remove certain components, possibly to a management level, rather than having them in the board policy manual. Recommendations resulting from that review would be submitted to the compensation committee for further review, not directly acted upon by that committee. We're going to be looking at an education policy, given the fact that there is some proposed legislation at this time regarding that topic, and we'll be reviewing the education policy in light of that. Also, the committee will review some proposed additions to the board policy manual that will consist of some charts listing those regular reports to the board and recurring items that may require board action. We'll probably incorporate some of those into an overall policy. So basically, the committee's doing a general review of not only its charter, but some of specifically what is appropriate within the overall board policies. Are there any questions?
Seeing none, Terry is moving this forward as adoption. Terry's moved for adoption, the board governance work plan for 14-15. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Joy. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, passes. Thank you. The next work plan is the compensation committee work plan. It looks like it's a relatively light year. I'm going to ask Cassandra if you wanted to highlight anything for us to to look at?
It is a light year, and we've discussed most, I think all, things get, there may be a couple of other insertions as we move along the year. So in September, we're going to be looking at the incentive criteria for the Chief Operating Investment Officer position that is going to be recruited for and filled. And we always want to make sure we have our performance criteria established before we fill those positions. So that's coming in September. November, we're going to be beginning the evaluation of the metrics within the asset classes and looking at the weightings within the varying asset classes, and have some input from our consultants on how those are weighted and if any changes should be made, including any benchmark changes. We're also going to be disclosing the incentive for the statutory positions in November that are a result of the performance year that we are just ending. In February, we will look at any recommended changes for the asset classes from the evaluation that was had begun in November. And we'll also be adopting any recommendations for the associate portfolio manager classification as we move forward to establish that new classification. And then in June, it's just closing out the year with the review of the work plan.
Any questions from the board? Seeing none, we'll move for adoption the work plan for the compensation committee for 14-15. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Sharon. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the work plan's been adopted. Thank you. Thanks, Cassandra. The next work plan is, Dana, it's back to you, the legislative committee work plan.
Trying to get this so I can actually see it.
I know, I was doing the same thing.
I can't get it. All right. Maybe I better go to pros. All righty. We will be looking at board sponsorship of legislation if there's any necessity. I think we'll probably be running our annual cleanup bill, technical cleanup bill. And we will be meeting November, February, April, and June. Once we figure out what sponsored legislation we will run, we will be taking positions on other persons' legislation that affect CalSTRS and our members. And in November, we will be having our twice annually visitation by John Stanton. He'll come by video in November and in person in February. And that does it for us.
Mary Ann, did you want to add anything?
No, that covers it. Right on.
Sharon?
One thing I was going to ask about for the Ledge Committee is, I know previously we had Anthony York come in and do a little California flavor, and I really like that. I know I heard Anthony's not necessarily working for LA Times anymore, but I just wondered if we could maybe get a little bit of a deeper dive into California and kind of pieces of legislation that might be, things like I'm curious to hear more about the secure choice, the private DB, an update on where that's going with, so I just wondered if we could do that. I know we did that. I can't remember, did we do that last year?
It was last year or the year
After the
before.
election, right? So since it's an election year, right, so November, I just wondered if that's something, I don't have my plan in front of me, but if that's something maybe after the election that we could do, Dana, after November? If we could have a California kind of update, kind of politics in California, how's that impacting, potential impact on retirement, security? And I don't know who that could be, but Dana
We'll take
and
a
the
look at it.
committee could take a look at that.
And it's also a good time to see if anyone's up to
Mischief for ballot initiatives for the following year or anything like that too. So, there's still people working around those issues. So that would be good.
We are looking at all initiatives, and we are following the progress of the secure choice. So.
We could invite a guest speaker.
Good reminder. I was just gonna say, Paul just reminded me, I remember you were on that committee, I'm like, we should have Grant give us an update. So,
There'll be more, hopefully, by that time.
I was gonna say,
More to
hopefully we'll
update us
be
on?
moving forward by
Okay.
then, so, great.
Cool.
Excellent, thanks.
Okay.
Alrighty.
Anything else?
That it? That's it?
So Dana's moving for adoption the legislative committee work plan for 14-15. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Paul. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. That passes. Sharon, you're next.
All right, so we're looking at the investment committee plan for this next year, and it is nice to say with the funding issue kind of, moving on out of the primary focus. I appreciated Rena's comments earlier about business renew, because I do think that's systemically for us as a system, that's a huge piece. But I also would suggest that, I know Paul and I met yesterday, and, I think the investment committee, really, we have a lot of work to do, and a lot of energy and focus can go towards looking at investments and
Just think 7.5, so.
yeah, baby, I'm gonna, tattoo. So I think that, to me, I see us as we've worked on the funding issue now, moving towards, so how do we get this 7.5, and how do we do that over a consistent period of time, and how do we, classic mitigate risk and maximize returns. So I think we have a lot of work to do, investment staff, and I know we'll do that well. So a couple of things I wanted to highlight, and then Chris, if you wanna, you're welcome to jump in as you want. In our last board meeting, we had we voted and gave some input and direction to the staff in terms of where we want to spend some time and energy. And so we have two topics. So as you can see on the work plan, over the major projects, for the first few months, we're going to be focused on risk and looking at the shortfall risk. And then in the spring, we're moving towards looking at environmental, social, and governance issues, sustainability. I will just comment for the offsite in October, just a reminder to the board that, we have a 2-day offsite in October, and we were lucky enough as the investment committee to grab that first day of the offsite to focus do a deeper dive. As a committee, we're trying to kind of look at each asset class and really have a robust conversation with the board, with our consultants, with our staff around different asset classes. So we're looking at global equities in the offsite and doing a deeper dive on that, as well as having a conversation about ESG issues. And we're working on that in terms of speakers, and we've had a couple of different iterations, and we'll see who we can land for that time. But that will be the first day of the October offsite. A couple things I wanted to mention in the plan in November, and so Chris, please correct me if I'm wrong, but we're looking at the responsible contractor policy in November. When are we? September. Okay. So, yeah, I didn't see it.
Responsible contractor, first reading is in September, and second reading will follow in November.
And so I did have some, and so perhaps Paul and I can chat with you guys a little bit more about, one of the things I know as we're looking at revising our responsible contractor policy is just trying as much as we can to get maybe more stakeholder input on what the policy should really look like or include to help mitigate some of the, I know, in the past, especially for Mike Direct, real estate gets a lot of, we just get a lot of input from folks, and I wonder if there might be some helpful ways moving forward to include things in our policy that could help those stakeholders feel like they have a voice in shaping the language of the policy, in keeping with our fiduciary duty, and keeping with what we need to be doing as a system. So perhaps we can talk between, obviously, now and then, how we might want to craft that, because I do want to, if we bring a first reading in September, I would really like for us to have some input on crafting that before the board sees that in September, so we can kind of make some modifications, as well as.
I think it's important that we have input from both sides, because they're very strong views on one side, but we don't hear from the other side. There's got to be balance in our policy.
Right, absolutely. So that's one piece, and then I know, so that, should we make sure we include that in the September work plan? Because I don't.
It's on the September agenda. I don't know why it dropped
Okay.
off. We had a couple of iterations of that plan, but it should be on there. And the policies, we'll probably be reviewing at least 5 or 6 of the policies during the year. We just didn't know at this point yet which ones will come up, but I've had a couple of directors approach Michelle and I and mention they need some revisions.
Okay. And then I know in November, we have the CEM investment cost report, and I know that looks at fees, which I know is something we've been thinking and talking a lot about. And I think we had talked about suggesting that that's the month that we talk about the staffing issues. Mm-hmm. And the request from Terry about looking at our asset classes, what our staffing levels are like in each of the asset classes in the investment house, and then just taking a look at that because I know that there are requests from investment staff about staffing, and so
In your next item, the
yeah,
budget,
and
yes,
so we'll be
there are.
talking about that a little bit today as well. We're going to continue to do our deeper tactical conversations. I think so far so good. I would really welcome, I know Paul and I would welcome input from the investment committee in terms of if you feel like those have been fruitful conversations so far. I feel like I really like the conversations we've been having so far with the consultants, with the board, and with our staff. So we'll continue those deeper dives into the asset classes throughout the year. Let's see. Anything else you want to highlight, Chris?
That's it. It'll be full.
A lot of work to do, so.
7.5.
We're gonna get tattoos right here. I like what you say though, Chris. You say it's always been 7.5. Before the funding issue, it's always been 7, yeah, or I should say,
Focus.
it was 8 when, it was 8 at one point.
Pace per mile, and we're running a marathon. And obviously, the last 2 years were downhill, so we got a very good pace. But the next year could be uphill, and we'll barely do it. So I think the important thing, as much as we say 7.5 year in and year out, it's actually 7.5 over 30 years. And so, we measure it in 3-year intervals. And some years will be ahead. I tend to always go back and look at that 3-year rolling period. So I know when we have a down year, the next 2 years we want to make it up. But even over 3 years, what is always going to matter is that 30-year period. And we just can't step back and measure life in 30-year intervals. But we know it's steady, and as I said to you in an email, it's great to get through June 30. We have exciting news for the audience about June 30, but July 1, we're right back at 0 and got to climb the mountain again. So what are you doing for us lately? We hear that.
Great. Any other input from the investment committee?
Can move for
Said
adoption?
I'd entertain a motion to adopt the investment work
So
plan.
moved.
Okay, it's been moved by Dana to adopt the the investment committee
Thanks,
work plan.
Chris.
Is there a
Thanks,
second? Second by Joy. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. That has been approved. Just any need for a 5-minute break before we continue with the agenda, or do we want to just continue right through?
Good to go.
No need? Okay, we'll continue.